Salutations, ladies and gentlemen. The Knife Raven here, back again with another video. And in today's video, I will be discussing a knife from a brand I haven't talked about in quite some time. And that would be Antonini from Maniago, Italy. Now, back when I last talked about this brand and made separate videos on them, it was a long time ago, back when I was certainly new to knives, and probably not very good at reviewing. However, now, I would fancy myself to be a little bit better at what I do, and I guess my opinions would be a bit more valid. So it's been long enough, and I've had mixed experiences with Antonini. I have 3 knives from them. 2 are Old Bear, which I am very pleased with. 1 is part of their pocket line, and that was the iffy one. This is also part of that line, and today I will be discussing it. Now, of course, it comes in this very simple cardboard box, and then in this little plastic bag. Now, this is the Antonini Caltagirone, or Caltagirone. And this is, I believe, an Italian regional knife. So, kind of like a French regional knife, but, well, in Italy. Now, this knife is quite unique. It's a very simple design, but there are some things about it that you don't see very much with knives, particularly nowadays, and it was part of that old school charm that interested me enough to, well, finally pull the trigger and get one of these. It costs, I believe, around 24 Canadian, which is a steal, and you have to consider these are made in Italy. These are completely authentic, so yeah. I think you're getting a fair bit of bang for your buck, but enough talking about that. Let's get into the specifications of this knife and how's the quality. So to start off, gapping. No real issues, really. It might seem like there's a gap here, but again, the spring is just a little lower than the liner, which gives the illusion of a gap. But there's no real gapping going on here. The grind here on the wood handle is a little bit uneven, but that's not a huge flaw, in my opinion. Of course, the pins are very flush, incredibly flush, actually, on the handles. And this pin right here it does stick up, but this is part of the design of the knife. So this is not a flaw, but if these were sticking up, then that would be. But they don't, so there's no flaw there. You have a nail nick to open the blade. Very good nail nick, but personally, I just like pinching the knife open, so whatever really works for you. It has a half stop, which I'd say the pull weight would probably come to about maybe a 6. Yeah, I'd say that's about a 6. And it opens to a very, very nice, slender spear point blade. You can see there is the Antonini Maniago, Italy pocket. This is part of their pocket knife line. They do some regional knives, some utility knives, and then there's their Old Bear series. This is just their standard everyday carry knife line. It says Caltagirone Inox. So this is a stainless blade. I believe it's 420A or 440. Yeah, I think it's 420C or 420A. I'll have to double check that, but it's a pretty standard, inexpensive stainless steel. Takes an okay edge, sharpens up fairly easily, has okay corrosion resistance, but doesn't hold an edge very long. It's a softer steel, so it will require a bit of upkeep and care, just so that you can always maintain a nice cutting edge with it. The handle scales are Cotibe wood, which has a very nice grain pattern, although can appear rather dry. I think a bit of wax and oil will really help this along. But nice, ever so slightly rough surface. It's not smooth like ebony, but it's not rough like oak. So kind of unique texture. And just overall, nice, simple piece of wood. I really like the bolster, which is a piece of brass. And you don't see brass bolsters very much on traditional knives nowadays. Most of the precision factory manufactured ones come with nickel silver. This is another knife for another day. Or in some cases, stainless steel. So seeing brass is becoming a rarity, and that's part of the reason I was really interested in this. It almost has a Barlow-like bolster. It's rather long compared to your average bolster. And I must say, the style of this knife is really quite lovely. It's very simple. It's very comfortable in the hand. This little back part here makes for a really comfortable grip. And all in all, this is a very nice knife for your everyday carry tasks. I apologize if I seem a little bit distracted. My cat just wandered into the room. In the meantime, this knife is, I believe, not UK legal. I will double check that. I know I have some UK viewers here, and for that reason, I will check. Okay, no, this is certainly not UK legal. The blade length with just the sharpened edge is already over 3 inches, and if you count the extra unsharpened bit, which apparently should always be taken into account because they can say that it is part of the blade, it would be well over 3 inches. So this is not a UK legal knife. But in other parts of the world that allow non-locking knives without any strict blade length laws, this should be perfectly fine. The half stop works pretty well. Added safety feature. No blade wobble whatsoever. Transition from the spring to the blade is a little bit off, but mostly good. And the blade itself is thankfully not warped, which is one of my most common issues that a lot of knives can have. So that's 1 point for Antonini there. Now, this is probably the part that a lot of my older viewers would want to see. This is the Antonini Siciliano. Now, the Siciliano was a knife I reviewed a few years back, and again, old review, I wasn't very knowledgeable of what I was talking about. I didn't do a great job of it, but this was a knife that I was very happy with, but it is certainly flawed. I mean, you can see the transition from the spring to the blade is kind of bad. The spring sits absurdly low. The grind on the wood up here is weird and uneven. Ever so slight bit of blade play. You know, uneven everything. This was certainly not the greatest knife I had ever owned. But even so, I do really still like this knife just for its simplicity. It's not attempting to be a premium knife. It's just a simple traditional knife. And I must say, I quite like it for that. Here it is next to the Caltagirone, and you can see that the Siciliano is thinner in its handle and in its blade, whereas the Caltagirone is, while the blade length is almost identical, you can see that there's a bit more sharpened blade on the Caltagirone than the Siciliano. The Siciliano has a rivet as opposed to a bolster, so there is that, and also the thickness is very different here. You can see that the bolsters are a lot thinner up here where the handle is rather thick, as opposed to the Siciliano, which has no bolsters, and the overall thickness is relatively similar. Another thing to note is this has a carbon steel back spring with brass liners, whereas this knife has, I believe, stainless steel liners with a stainless steel spring. However, it has a brass bolster. So you can see the similarities between these two knives, but there are also some major differences. They both use the same steel for the blade and the same wood for the handle, though. So there is that. But which one do I like better? I think for the simplicity, I really still enjoy the Siciliano, but the fit and finish on it is less than what I would hope for. And for that reason, the fit and finish on the Caltagirone wins out, and I would say that I do prefer this knife among the two. However, despite this knife having a very good record of no issues, there is one flaw, and it is a pretty noticeable one. The centering is terrible in the closed position. Now, although I can forgive this for one reason. The way the blade is off-center is to the left. Now, as opposed to a French knife here, which is the Rone, which is off to the right. Now, when you have a knife where the nail nick is here, you're going to be putting a bit of pressure here when you're opening it, which means you're pushing the blade ever so slightly this way. So when you open it, there isn't going to be any scraping of the inside, because when you put your nail here, you push the blade away from the liner just enough to prevent any scratching, and then you can open your blade. In the case of the Rone, however, when you're pushing the nail nick this way, you're actually pushing it more into the liner, which will cause more scraping. So I don't ever want an off-center blade. In fact, I would really prefer if I never had to have any off-center blades. But if it's going to be off-center, it's better that it's over here as opposed to over here. Because again, when you're pushing that blade, you're going to prevent any scratching. But if it was on this side, you're just going to be making it worse. So, all in all, this one flaw would irritate a lot of people, and it does irritate me. But you have to keep in mind, this was a 24 or 25 Canadian dollar knife. So to US, that would be about 18, 19. And in the UK, I believe that would cost, 14, 15. So you have to keep in mind, this is a very cheap knife. This is, like, we're talking Rough Rider, Opinel levels of cheap. In fact, this is cheaper than most Rough Riders, and just a tiny bit more expensive than the most basic of Opinel. I still would take an Opinel any day over this because I really like them, but this is still a very well-made knife. So all in all, no blade play, no gaps, half stop. Centering is the only real issue here. Slightly offset grind, smooth pins, good sharpened edge, decent steel for everyday carry, and timeless design that fits really well in the hand. No, I've got to say this knife is a good 7 out of 10, as opposed to this, which would be probably 5 out of 10. So if you're going to pick up an Antonini that isn't an old bear, that is, go with this one. So thank you very much for watching. This has been the Antonini Caltagirone, and this is the Knife Raven, as always, signing off. Goodbye.